Alright, listen. It's common knowledge that Cyberpunk 2077 ended up being a victim of overhyping. Being a massive disappointment for many, Cyberpunk released to a fanfare equivalent of the Sonic Unleashed E-ranking song. Riddled with an insane number of visual and game-altering bugs, lackluster gameplay systems, and missing features, the fans have been in an uproar over the state of the game on launch day and the week following. While the discussion of why you shouldn't buy into a hype train is more than enough to warrant its own video, what I wanted to talk about were my thoughts and experience with the game where I stayed behind at the hype station. I went into Cyberpunk 2077 with no expectations, and while it's probably blasphemous to say, I enjoyed my time in Night City. But, and that is a big but, it wasn't because I thought it was a masterpiece. Oh no, it has some serious issues that I'll be touching on, but there are two main reasons why I enjoyed myself. The first is that I went into this game with basically no expectations. I wasn't foaming at the mouth for this detailed living world with innovative systems or an immersive RPG experience. Instead, I went in expecting a fun little game, and I sort of got that. Fun is subjective, and the second reason I enjoyed myself was because of how buggy the game was. Now, a game being in desperate need of fumigation is not necessarily a good thing, especially when it comes to a AAA game that spent 8 years of inactive and active development. But I'd be lying if I didn't say these bugs added to the fun for me. I've always gotten a kick out of bugs and glitches, so it's quite amusing when you encounter Gmod levels of physics due to a random bug. But what about the game itself? Well, let me first get it out of the way that Cyberpunk basically fell into the same pit as No Man's Sky a few years back. The game is much more hollow than was promised and shown to the public over the years, with several not so obvious and obvious pieces of cut content. The manipulation and withholding of information from CDPR isn't something that should be ignored at all, and they should be fully held accountable for this mess of a release. But I'm not here to parrot opinions of this. In short, yes, I do think the game has serious problems just based on the false promises of the company, but I find it important to judge a game based on the final product we're given as well. While it is extremely disappointing to see that none of the game mechanics are as fleshed out and industry-changing as many thought they were going to be, it doesn't mean everything is bad. In fact, if you push aside the technical issues, I'd say the game as a whole is mediocre, with the exception of the story, characters, and the world standing out as the best parts of the game. To me, it plays like a slightly better Ubisoft game. You know, games like the current Assassin's Creed and Watch Dogs, that sort of core gameplay. Open world, missions gated by player level, some level of clothing customization, and various weapon types. Cyberpunk plays like those kinds of games, and that's either a good or a bad thing based on your opinion of those sorts. These are games I tend to enjoy for around 10 to 20 hours of play, and then sort of fall off. For instance, I never finished Assassin's Creed Origins, Odyssey, or Watch Dogs Legion, but I still played quite a lot of each game. The reason is this sort of gameplay loop becomes repetitive and easy to see how many systems are simply recycled with a new coat of paint slapped on it for the next game that comes out. For some reason though, I kept on Cyberpunk for a longer period, and I think what kept me around was the story, characters, and world. Obviously, the Cyberpunk over-sexualized setting is a very intriguing backdrop, and the world has this weird mix of insane detail and not enough detail at the same time. It's kind of fascinating when you actually look at it. On one hand, you have guitarists properly fingering their guitars to an actual song that they're playing. But on the other hand, you have possibly the dumbest AI roaming around a world that also is ripe with incomplete assets. The police AI being a special kind of irritating, as police will simply pop into existence 10 yards from your face. When Watch Dogs Legion has a better police system than you might need to reevaluate your decisions on where your time and effort goes into. With how many oddities exist around Night City, it's impossible not to talk about this game's technical performance. Simply put, it is hot garbage. For reference, I played this game on my PC that rocks an i9 CPU and a 1080 Ti graphics card with 32GB of RAM. At medium to low settings, I could barely get this game over 60 FPS. Something that you guys won't necessarily see in the video, but to my spoiled 144Hz eyes, I couldn't stop thinking about. Likely a byproduct of running the game on a hard drive as opposed to an SSD, in the first few days after release, I had some serious model loading issues. While driving at low speeds, cars that were 2 feet in front of me would still be using their muddy, blocky, faraway models, and would only load into their high-quality ones after a few seconds. It was even to the point where the models didn't load in until I was literally inside of them, resulting in actual road crashes. The technical performance did absolutely dampen my enjoyment of the game due to how used I am to running games like this at a higher frame rate, but the game was still more than playable. I never ran into crashes, but there were some occasional freezes, likely by the game not having loaded properly at that point, which probably coincides with my previous issue. So what are my final thoughts on the current state of Cyberpunk 2077? I don't think it's as bad as people are making it out to be. A lot of the hate the game is getting is because they were a passenger of the hype train that crashed in a manner akin to the spectacle of the train and end of the line. Disappointment and overly exotic expectations is what happened with this game. But because I didn't buy into that, I came out of it with an enjoyable experience because I took the game for what it was, not what I expected it to be. Yes, if you compare it to what was promised in the game, it is objectively terrible. But I still had a fun time running around the city pantsless and flashing this overly sexualized, deprived future controlled by corporations. Oh wait, you can't actually do that.